while Leanne is still in the US finishing her PhD in literature, which probably you know usually takes about 10 years for some reason, any PhD in literature. But meanwhile, she's translating many Christian classics for publication in China. Another example in the media would be friends of mine, Art and Sue Hua in Northern Virginia, who have assisted in the design and management of dozens of Christian Chinese language websites, proving in this global era you don't have to live overseas to have an impact overseas. Guangfu Zhou was also one of the founding fathers of the Chinese YMCA, serving as editor of its English journal and a board member or chairman for 3 decades, during which the Y became a major cultural force behind popular education in character building and citizenship. The man on the right also became a leader in the National YMCA with its focus on practical Christianity, reflecting his own commitments. His mission to create a new type of Chinese citizen was also evident in his work in Tianjin, where he founded the first independent and non-denominational church in North China, and the first indigenous private education, starting with the Nankai Middle School, which eventually became today's prominent Nankai University. In China today, the YMCA and YWCAs have been reconstituted under state leadership and are very active in the nonprofit sector. There's a community center in Pudong in Shanghai, for example, run by the YMCA that's kind of a model and a pioneer in a new style community center. Recently, some private associations like Peter Zhao's Cyprus Leadership Institute have begun to promote character building and moral reform. And a friend of mine from Colorado is just this week preaching and teaching through Zhao's Cyprus Leadership Institute, promoting servant leadership in all sectors in China. So if you want, you can go to his website, www.chinacli.cn. ChinaCLI.cn. You can also go to Frank and Anna's website, agapeway.org. Today in the business field, there are many Christian business executives beginning to explore the field of philanthropy. And mostly they're starting with traditional approaches, which are financing schools or scholarships in their hometowns or poor villages. Another arena of Christian leadership 100 years ago was women in public leadership. Christian colleges in China were the first to admit women. And one of the first female college graduates was Wu Yifang, shown in her early 20s as the new first Chinese woman college president. She received a PhD in biology from the University of Michigan, which you wouldn't think would really prepare her for such a role. But while she was a student here, she learned leadership skills as president of the National Chinese Students Club and the National Chinese Students Christian Association. So her speaking skills and organizing, moderating skills became famous in China, and she represented China in many international religious and women's convocations in the 30s. And in the photo on the right, you can see her signing the UN Charter in San Francisco in 1945. She was one of only 4 women to sign it as one of China's 10 delegates to the founding conference. In the early 1900s, the New York City home of Pastor Xu Qin was the center of the Chinatown community, helping Chinese laborers and students. He founded a remarkable family still prominent in American life. There's been a PBS series about the family here in the US by Bill Moyers. The 6 daughters in this photo all gained college education in the US and returned to China with their husbands and left a remarkable legacy of service in education, rural development, religious and medical work. So bringing women into public leadership was a major contribution of the church. A fifth arena then would be social reform, social work. One of those 6 daughters, Alice Xu, is shown here in this photo with her husband, Yan Yangchu, a founder of the mass education movement, the MEM. He was among the first to see the urgency of addressing China's rural problems. So in 1926, the family moved to a poor rural area south of Beijing. So here they are in their country clothing. They brought together other returning scholars from the US to develop a model county, Dingxian. They combined literacy training, public health, and rural development with self-government. So this holistic model of rural development was copied elsewhere in China by many government and nonprofit agencies trained by these people at Dingxian. Well, today in China, I know of at least 2 Chinese Christians who are doing similar work among the rural poor today. Greg and his wife lived in the US with their son for many years while Greg got his MBA, became a committed Christian, and then worked for a large city government in the US. But now they have returned to China last year to work among rural migrant workers in East China. And they're mentoring and teaching members of a traveling performing arts troupe that do evangelistic work as well as job training among the migrant workers. Another friend, Mr. Wang, was born in a highly placed Christian family, exiled to Xinjiang in the 1950s, and was orphaned by anti-Christian political campaigns. After study and work in the US, he returned to live in several poor mountainous ethnic minority villages in southwest China, which I visited a couple times, a 5-hour Jeep ride through the mountains on pretty scary mountain roads. He teaches and preaches and provides health care, following the holistic kind of ministry approach of his hero, Samuel Pollard, a British missionary 100 years ago. He's named his work the Samuel Pollard Institute, in fact. Well, the final arena of influence of Chinese Christians 100 years ago was international partnerships, both in the international church circles, but also just in diplomacy. These are 2 different photos of a young and an older Yan Huiqing, who was raised in Shanghai, among other civic cosmopolitan leaders fluent in foreign languages who bridged Eastern and Western cultures. They were affiliated with St. John's University, a Christian college there. Many of China's diplomats well into the 1950s had been students at St. John's. Well, I can't go into detail about his fascinating life, but I've written about it in volume 2 of our book series. And I should mention that today in China, although you won't see publicly avowed Christians in the top leadership, which is still reserved for Communist Party members, but there are many individual Christians with influence on national policy in a number of arenas, although they don't make their faith known publicly at this point. Well, today in China, this civil society from the past is just beginning to be revived, and church involvement by individuals and organizations is just beginning in the broader society. But I'm hoping that recalling these earlier stories and recovering this lost legacy, lost heritage, these examples might be inspiring and encouraging for Chinese and other Christians working in China. You've now met some civic pioneers from the past and the present who found their vision and purpose in the Christian faith. And you can find hundreds of such stories, short stories, on the 2 websites listed on this slide, both in Chinese and in English. So these Chinese have sought to live out the command of Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount, to love him by loving others, as the salt of the earth and the light of the world. meaning that like salt, they are to be a moral preservative in a society under enormous stress, both back then and now. And like light, they are to offer hope in dark times. Some of the experience and wisdom of those earlier times has lived on in students, successors, descendants of those early pioneers. And some of the institutions they built still operate in China and overseas. So I hope this is a heritage that can provide resources for social reform in China today. But more broadly, it's also my hope that as we, citizens of today's global society, live in America or China or Africa or Latin America or Europe, all of us can find inspiration and encouragement through learning about these redemptive change agents. So thank you. We'll have some